Tonight's topic is about skiing in the San Juan Mountains. The Durango and Silverton Narrow Gauge Railroad was kind enough to sponsor tonight's event. We appreciate the train for the sponsorship. This event really isn't possible ongoing without those local sponsors. Tim Kroes and his wife Shelley moved to Durango in 1990 from the San Francisco Bay Area to raise their family in what they considered to be a healthy outdoor small town community. Tim began volunteering with Adaptive Sports Association as a ski instructor for individuals with disabilities in 1991. Within a few years, he became program director with Adaptive Sports before becoming executive director for almost 18 years. He retired in 2016 and has since been seeking the perfect balance of play, travel, home projects, and community involvement.
So I'm Tim Kroes, as Shane mentioned, and my history is not as deep. As a matter of fact, my wife and I moved here back in 1990. I became involved with Adaptive Sports as a volunteer right at that time just to meet people. We didn't know a person in town. And so if you can do a little simple math, that's only 28 years. That's hardly digging deep into the history of skiing in the San Juans. And as I look around the room here and certainly at the panel up here, we have some true legends. What I'd like to do is actually take a step further back. I'm supposed to talk about the Adaptive Sports Association, but what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about where it came from. So going back about 10 years before I moved here, there was another fellow Midwesterner named Dave Spencer from Wisconsin. I'm from Michigan originally, and anybody from that part of the world, your dream is to somehow end up in Colorado. And Dave had the kind of personality that somehow made that happen. He got on the phone, he saw an ad for a ski instructor position at Purgatory. Got on the phone and sold himself, which he was very good at doing, and he ended up getting a job with a ski school, came out here, and it wasn't until he arrived that the ski school director realized that they had hired a guy with one leg. Dave had cancer. He was in his early 20s. He had an attitude and a charisma and enthusiasm that didn't let that slow him down at all. And so what ended up happening is they put him to work in the regular ski school teaching able-bodied ski lessons. How do you teach a snowplow turn or a wedge turn to somebody, a regular person without a disability? I'm not quite sure. But Dave did that for a season or so. And somewhere along the way, about later in that season, there was a young couple that had arrived in Durango on a ski trip from San Diego. The wife, Sue, had a water skiing accident that previous summer, and a major accident, almost lost her life, but instead she lost her leg. She had been athletic to that point, but had made the decision to not let that stop her family from still being involved in sports. She stocked up on books and said, we'll still go on family ski trips. She sat in the lodge that Jack just showed us, Far Courts, and was reading books as she looked out and saw skiing down Pando, a guy on one leg, flying down Pando off the bumps, and he came in for a slice of pizza. She couldn't believe that and had never seen anything like that before, so she went up to him, introduced herself, and said, could you teach me how to do it? And he says, well, I don't know. I've never taught anybody else with a disability, but we'll figure it out. So what ended up happening is they scheduled a trip back. The family did later that winter. She spent a week of private lessons with Dave and learned to ski, which turned out to be a transformative, truly life-changing experience for her. Enough so that her husband was elated, had seen this transformation happen in his wife, with simply giving her back that gift of being able to do a sport and be outdoors again and do something with the family. So they started hassling Dave and some fellow ski instructors, Joe Wilson, Atlanta Joe Chapin was involved in those early years, Pam Liesel came along right around that time, Connie Roush was in the picture. There were a number of people that were all involved in those early years, and they said, you guys need to do this for more people. Teach them to ski. It makes a difference. This is a life-changing experience. So over a lot of beer on 3rd Avenue in one of those little small old miners' houses, that David rented. They sat on the front porch and figured out, how do we start a nonprofit? How do we do this? And they spent the summer kind of figuring it out, working their way through it. Dave was kind of a natural salesman, so he talked to the folks up at PERG and some local businessmen. Don Maple is one that comes to mind for me, because I know Dave went into his office and talked to him about what he wanted to do. And Don wrote a check and said, let's get this thing happening. So Don is at Coca-Cola. The Maple family is still very involved in this community, and actually very involved with adaptive sports. And Dave also went out to California and talked to the Torrey Pines Kiwanis Club. Ross was a member of this young club, and they were trying to find a mission. And they thought this could be it. It could be disability-related things. And so the club got so excited seeing Dave do a demo on one of those rotating carpets that happened to be in town for a ski show, that they agreed to send skiers out for Learn to Ski Weeks in Durango. There was no other tie other than this family, Ross, Sue, and their daughter. And so that was kind of the impetus of this thing. And so what ended up happening is Dave, unfortunately, passed away about 3 years later in 1986 from the cancer. But the mission and that initial idea of what he had envisioned really holds true today. The mission's been tweaked a little bit with a few words here and there, but the basic concept hasn't changed in 35 years. So we're at a point now where the Adaptive Sports Association's looking back at, we're teaching, it's primarily a volunteer-based organization. A number of you in the room here have been involved as a volunteer with the organization. There are about 200 to 250 active volunteers at any given time. They donate about 15,000 hours in a town of, 18,000 people. It's pretty incredible. So it's truly a community effort. They're teaching about 800 to 1,000 lessons a season. So we're talking 25,000 to 30,000 lessons over the years in this little remote part of the country. This was one of the first programs of its type in the United States. There were a couple others that had just kind of started, so they didn't really have much of a model yet. And so they were winging it, much like how many things happen in a town like Durango. It was community spirit and passion, and let's just go out and figure out how do we make this thing work, and they did do that. We can see and looking at these pictures, I just stuck the pictures up here so you can kind of see it. It's obviously jumping all around in time, but I thought it would give you something a little more interesting to look at than my ugly mug as I sit here chatting with you. But the equipment's evolved over the years, but that idea of adaptive is still the same. It originally was adapting with duct tape and wire and all these different things of how do we adjust to different disabilities. Those old sit skis that look like toboggans have evolved now into mono skis that are titanium frames with high-end mountain bike shock absorbers and things like that, very high performance pieces of equipment. And we've also evolved into a summer program that began back in the mid-90s. So we're doing river rafting and sea kayaking and hiking and camping and all that kind of thing. The scholarship programs, including the San Diego connection, continues to this day. Many of you have hosted skiers that have come in to town for a Learn to Ski Week with a disability, and they've stayed with host homes in town. That same model continues. We've also had some success with some of the skiers through this program going on to national and international fame and recognition. A number of Paralympic team members, U.S. team members. We had a young woman just last week was inducted into the U.S. Disabled Ski Hall of Fame, Mary Riddell from Dove Creek. We've had the top medal winner in the entire Paralympic history came from our Learn to Ski program right here in Little Durango. So it's kind of like Devo, where it's let's go out and let people have fun doing a sport, and there'll be some that will rise to the top, and that certainly has been the motto of the program. So it's truly a life-changing thing. It's a little different. Most of the folks in this room are here because you love the outdoors. You love sports. You love skiing. When you throw disability into that equation, it only amplifies it. What you're doing there is you're taking somebody that didn't think this was possible at all, and you're pushing their limits in their comfort zone, and they're experiencing success. And when that success comes, that impacts everything else in their life. So it's more than just the sport. We're talking about them going back to school, going back to work, getting married, and they credit adaptive sports for that kind of thing because it is that kind of life-changing experience. So I honestly, as I reflect back on this, Dave continues as a major role model, even though he was gone before I got here. The organization still uses him as a model. We have a biggest fundraising event is the Dave Spencer Ski Classic, which was a couple weeks ago. The Dave Spencer Center is our building up at Purgatory. And that passion and vision continues, and I think it was just the perfect thing at the perfect time in the perfect place. We're talking about Durango. This is a place that gives because of passion and caring and a love for the outdoors, a love for sports, and that giving back to community thing is why Susan and I chose to move to Durango 28 years ago, and that's probably why a lot of you are here. And so I'm not sure if it would have happened the same way with this model and been so successful if it had happened in any other place. But it was a win-win situation. We're fortunate to have been a part of it, and I'm certainly blessed to have had it fall into my lap and be a part of my life. Thank you.